cut that short today. How we doing? Hello, and welcome to another edition of Bomber's Hit List on the College Football Mafia Network. I'm your host, Nathan Bomber Brown, and I'm excited. We finally got on the stage somebody that I've wanted to talk to for a very long time, John Canzano. How we doing, John?
I'm doing well, man. Never a dull moment, is there? I mean,
No.
right now with the ACC stuff, I think a lot of people in Pac-12 country kind of craning their necks, going, "Okay, what's going to happen over there?" After watching what happened in the Pac-12.
Absolutely, and we'll get
Yeah,
to Washington State and Oregon State in just a little bit. But I just so you know, I'm from Washington. Grew up in the Pacific Northwest. University of Washington, Washington State are close to my heart, and it's really important. I want Washington State to end it somewhere, but
sure.
we'll talk about in a little bit. Really quick, let me do an introduction. My guest today is an Oregon sports writing legend. I put legend in there for you, John Canzano, someone who has seen it all in the state of Oregon, the Pac-12, and NCAA athletics. Today we will discuss college football, the Big 12, Big 10, ACC realignment. You notice how I left SEC out of there?
Yeah.
NIL and whatever else we can talk about, and I'm really looking forward to that. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, John.
Well, I mean, look, I'm in my radio studio. I host a 3-hour daily radio show that is syndicated across the state of Oregon. I never really intended to be a radio guy. For anybody out there who just kind of fell into something and then kept doing it and then looked up 17 years later and said, "Oh my gosh, I'm doing this thing." Like, it's been amazing. We have a daily 3-hour conversation here in the afternoon drive that now extends to the southern edge of the state with affiliates all the way from southern Washington down to southern Oregon. And so that's a lot of fun. But also writing a column at johncanzano.com. I've been in the newspaper business. I worked at 6 different papers, covered the Big Ten, lived in SEC or ACC country. Grew up in the West Coast, grew up in the Bay Area, grew up with the Pac-12. So I'm just having a lot of fun. I mean, and in this world, I find myself, I was talking to a conference commissioner yesterday, I find myself busier than ever. And I don't know if it's just our culture where we're all busy. I got kids, 3 daughters, kids in summer camp, 1 kid in college. Everything's moving like crazy. My father-in-law moved in with us about, a year ago. He moved from Taiwan over, moved in with us because he was having some health issues. But I find myself busier than ever. And I can't figure out if it's just the sports world is nonstop or if maybe like all of us from COVID went home and
Right.
we no longer have boundaries between work and, hey, you're supposed to be off now. You should probably set it aside. But that's where I am.
Yeah, and you know what? I do believe COVID was a big instigator. I do believe maybe we would have ended up where we are today over a period of time, maybe in 5 or 10 years. But COVID just took everything, and
Yeah.
the time just shrunk down. And any plans that people had that were long term past 2021, those are probably mostly blown up.
Yeah. And I think too, like some of it's good. Like I don't miss the drive, the commute to, I used to,
Right.
do the show in downtown Portland in a high rise building and the station's still there, but we installed all the infrastructure during the
Right.
pandemic and the radio show goes from home. And guess what? It doubles as a podcast studio and a
Yep.
TV studio. And so I do find myself doing more of these types of interviews and they're fun. I get to meet people like you all over the country.
Well, I'm glad. I've been really looking forward to you being here. I'm going to start off with a mea culpa. You know this, but I want to tell everybody else. I was very critical of John and John Wilner during the Pac-12 mess, is what I would call it. Wrote it down here, Pac-12 nightmare. I was critical on YouTube. I was critical on Twitter. Here, I thought I was the only one that knew the answer, right, to all this mess. But I was a subscriber. I subscribed to both your like articles. I can't remember what's the system that puts them out.
It's on Substack, but
Substack, that's
yeah,
right.
but johncanzano.com is where I call it.
And I did the same thing with Wilner.
Yeah.
I subscribed to his newspaper. But since then, I've changed my mind. Since the Pac-12 exploded, it's easy to be critical when you have nothing to lose, which I didn't. It's also easy to forget we're talking about people and institutions that are massively impacted by poor choices, not their own. Some made at an administration level in the Pac-12, and some made by the conference commissioner, George Kliavkoff. I only really have a couple of follow-on questions, but
Yeah.
before I get to those, anything come off the top of your head that you went through this and now you're like, okay, I'm ready to go next step?
No, it's interesting that you bring up the people involved, and there's something I've been thinking about a lot in the last year, right? You have presidents and chancellors at Pac-12 universities that some acted, I think, in bad faith. Some of them, all were looking around just scared. They ran for the hills when Oregon and Washington just decided they were out. You had the LA schools that may or may not have been plotting their exit years in front of actually leaving, and you have presidents and chancellors who made some big decisions that impacted these universities, impacted athletes, impacted fans. And the chancellors and presidents come and go, the commissioners come and go. We know this. Anyone in media knows. You look around. I'm going to, if my health holds up, I will I'll outlast the general manager of the Trailblazers.
Right.
There have been 7 or 8 or 10 of them in the time that I've been here. Right. So players come and go, athletes come and go, coaches come and go. Fans are left holding the bag at the end for all these decisions. Even media companies, they morph. There's, the consolidation. They're bought and sold. The fans end up holding the bag at the end. I think it's one of the byproducts of all of the changes we're seeing in the ecosystem with the loss of rivalries and traditions and conferences that people don't end up thinking about. And I'm watching this as Washington and Washington State both have presidents that have announced they're leaving in a year.
Yeah,
going, okay, they get to go. Fans at those two schools are stuck with, okay, what's life going to be like in the Big Ten, and what's life going to be like if they can't get to a Power 4 conference if you're Washington State?
Yeah, it's very true. All right, so these are the critical questions. I hope you take them in the spirit that they're at. Anything you don't want to answer, it's fine.
There's nothing off limits here. Bring it on. I mean, and it's none of this is personal. That was the other thing. Like, look, we can agree, disagree, whatnot. You and I sit by each other in a press box. We get along fine. I mean, it's just it's opinion, and it's sports. It's not war. It's not the debate. It's not the economy. It's not Middle East. It's nobody's dying here. Like, let's debate.
All right, so here we go. I'm going to run these together, and you can answer them however you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you change anything about your reporting in the last 2 years that went into the Pac-12 realignment mess? If you could do it all over, is there a different way you would have reported the information you received from some very credible sources? The timeline is just a mess, and now it seems like you, and I'm going to say John Wilner too, because you guys are partners, were manipulated to some extent. That manipulated word, I went through about 7 different words to put there. Yeah. That's the one I stuck with.
No, it's a good word. I think it's a good word.
And then the last piece is I'm asking for a lot of people that care about the way both you and John were treated after it all blew up.
Yeah.
That I really started to, I'm a defender now, just so you know. I'm personally trying to change the narrative. I'm promoting kindness and patience, which definitely we lost during realignment. Yeah. So through that, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'll go back. I'll attack the first part of that first. It's, you're as a reporter, any reporter, yes, you're subject to manipulation. Your sources are going to tell you, hopefully, what's actually happening, hopefully what is true and accurate. And I believe that I was talking to multiple presidents within the Pac-12, presidents in multiple states at that time. They were all saying the same thing. They were, and some of it was solidarity, of course. And some of it, as a reporter, you go, okay, yeah, they're preaching that everything is fine and dandy until it's not. But, I had presidents all the way through that believed until August 3rd, August 4th in the morning that the Pac-12 had a deal. And it looked like, and they went to bed on that evening before August 4th thinking, hey, we've got a deal. And 2 of the schools, Oregon State and Washington State, even signed the grant of rights prior to, being informed in the morning that, hey, look, these other schools aren't coming to the meeting. Where I knew there was potential problem was at Pac-12 Media Day in July, because
Media Day,
football media day in July. It was interesting to me because all along in talking to presidents and I'm not going to name the schools, but I mean, 10 of the presidents on and off, but 8 or 9 of them regularly were giving me information and talking to me, and at least, wanted to know what other presidents were saying. And so a lot of those conversations are going on behind the scenes. These were not media handlers. These were not PR companies. These were the people that were in the room making the decision. And so as a media person, all you can do is report what they're saying to you.
Right.
Sure. But on media day in July, when George Kliavkoff got on the stage, he started talking, and he was using phrases that I heard from a number of different presidents. And it was the first day I was sitting in the crowd, and I went, that is the exact phrase that was used by 6 or 7 of the presidents like a week earlier. And I thought to myself, it's really peculiar to me that they're using the exact same phrase. And I kind of wondered at that moment, are either they've been given a set of talking points that they were supposed to go out and disseminate with their media sources, or they were all getting information from the same person. And that is a dangerous place to be. I later found out that the negotiating circle with the Pac-12 was Doug Perlman, who was with the Sports Media Advisors Group, who was advising the Pac-12 throughout the negotiation. He did not have great experience in the college space. It was George Kliavkoff. You had multiple presidents, including Taylor Randall at Utah, who wanted to be in the negotiating room. They were told, we don't need you in there. And so what became evident on Media Day was I went, gosh, they're all getting their information from one person, the same person. They used the same phrases that George Kliavkoff used. And I think Kliavkoff closed that circle down so small that I think very few of those presidents actually knew how dire it was until he presented to them, here's the Apple deal. And they all went, gosh, we were expecting something better. I think in hindsight, the Apple deal would have been fine. But if you're Oregon or Washington and you've got guaranteed money on the table from the Big Ten and a chance to be with the haves, you can't do that. So as I look back on it, I look back and I think, gosh, when that same phrase kept coming up and Kliavkoff got on stage and he used it, I had people walk up to me and say, hey, your reporting is going to end up being right. It looks like the Pac-12 is going to pull it together. And it did until the 11th hour. It looked like they were going to pull it together. But all I can do in reporting and telling my sources and my, my audience what I know to be true is lean on those presidents who are in the room. If they want to be disingenuous or they want to mislead me, then there's not much that I can do about that.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I think that's why I wanted to clear that up. A lot of people, it's always easy when you're really high to throw stones on people that are below.
And here's the other thing. Look, I covered Indiana basketball when Bobby Knight was the coach. I covered the NFL. I covered the NFL. I covered Notre Dame football. I covered Purdue as a beat reporter. I covered Jerry Tarkanian when he was at Fresno State. I don't hear, I've developed some thick skin. So, all the chatter on social media or whatnot, that it's talk, right? It's all just talk and chatter. I still have to be true to my sources. I've got to serve my readers. When I've got presidents at the schools saying we have solidarity, we need to see the deal. Even when Colorado left, I had presidents after that and athletic directors after that tell me, hey, Colorado's gone. I think they were going to backfill with San Diego State, maybe take a peek at Colorado State if they had the appetite for it. SMU was on the table. San Diego State had the letter drafted even on August 3rd, August 4th. And so I think a lot of it came down to what are Washington and Oregon going to do in that 11th hour? And I think, about 6 or 7 of those Pac-12 schools went to bed on that Thursday night thinking, oh, we're going to have a deal. We'll live to play another day.
I, as a Washington fan, the minute USC was gone, I told everybody for over a year, there's no way Washington stays in the Pac-12, knowing that it was going to be a haves and have-nots. Again, this is easy for me to say. I'm not involved in any of it, but I never thought Washington and then Oregon as a tag-along were ever going to stay in the Pac-12.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch the Board of Regents in Arizona. I think it was on the Tuesday or Wednesday of that final week when the Board of Regents were meeting, and the Regents said, hey, we want you guys to stick together. And so, there was a lot of outcry at that time. And obviously everybody was getting nervous, kind of looking around. Washington and Washington State had talked about legislation a year earlier that would have tied those two schools together. And the university presidents talked about it and said, hey, we don't want to be at odds. We don't want to be in a situation where we'd have to give testimony, in front of lawmakers. And then Oregon and Oregon State, you go back there, there was a law that was passed 12, 13 years ago that separated the Board of Trustees for Oregon and Oregon State. They used to be under one board. If that doesn't happen, Oregon and Oregon State are not in separate conferences. It would have been the same as the Board of Regents in Arizona. So there were some interesting things along the way that happened that sort of led to this moment where it was, hey, here's this new world. And for people who don't know the Pac-12 presidents and schools had been through the Pac-12 network where they had been overpromised and underdelivered. The Apple deal would have been, I think, really palatable and I think potentially really lucrative to some of the schools, but there just was no appetite for uncertainty given the promises that have been broken over 10 or 11 years.
Yeah, what you mentioned about Washington State, Oregon State. Hello, North Carolina,
Yeah.
and they have the same. Is it trustees or governors that they are one? And there's this struggle now. What happens in the ACC? We'll get to that in a second. All right, so let me ask you some fun questions. First, Washington State, Oregon State. If the ACC blows up, but every I will say, sorry, Wake Forest, Boston College, maybe Georgia Tech. Some of these schools want to stay together with Stanford and Cal. Is that a good move for Washington State and Oregon State?
Well, I think, I've been told that Washington State and Oregon State are going to run out every ground ball. That's one
Right.
of them, right?
Right.
So I think, Kurt Schultz, the president of Washington State, I did a Q&A with him earlier this week. He said he believes that the ACC issue will be solved by the end of football season.
Okay.
That's what his expectation is. So he says he thinks in January or February, Oregon State, Washington State will know if that is even a possibility. Now, I see a couple of things there if the ACC does fracture. One, the ACC may have an appetite for a Pacific division to give Stanford and Cal some travel partners and some easier company. Oregon State, Washington State, I think would raise their hands immediately. I think they'd say, bring us in. They also have that $255 million war chest.
Right.
Now, there's some consideration there if you're Washington State and Oregon State, because if you leave and you abandon the Pac-12 brand altogether, some of that money reverts back to Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and the school, Washington,
Right.
Oregon, the schools that left.
Yeah.
So there's some financial incentive for those schools that left that are on the hook for, $65 million settlement that they had to give, plus all the Rose Bowl money, the equivalency funds, the postseason distributions. I think Arizona might be one of the schools that has the most to gain if that Pac-12 thing does work out for Oregon State, Washington State. So there's some tentacles to that. And I think there would be a huge appetite for Oregon State and Washington State. There's still enough ACC schools left for the ACC to exist in some form or fashion on its own. But I also have kind of kicked around the idea, like, would the Big 12 and Brett Yormark, as aggressive as he's been, would he view that as an opportunity to go, hey, Big 10 and SEC have pulled away.
Right.
There's strength in numbers. Are there some brands in the ACC that he would want to grab? And would he then have an appetite for a Pacific division himself? Now, some people think, a conference, once you get above like 20, 22, 24, it starts to not become a conference. So maybe there's some allergy there. But, what it comes down to for me is, what is the appetite of ESPN and the other media companies if the Big 12 or ACC go, hey, the Big 10 and the SEC have gotten so far away, we need to kind of have this third place conference be as strong as possible with numbers that can combat what is going on with those other two that are looking to run away with it.
Absolutely. And let's talk about that. So private equity, there was a leak that came out 2 weeks ago that it was a stupid leak because everybody knew that Big 12 and Brett Yormark had already been talking to like Endeavor and some other private equity groups. But what's your thought about having private equity and using it not to build up the individual schools, but actually underwrite schools from the ACC to come in and pay some of those leaving fees?
Yeah, I think you got to kick the tires on it. I know the Pac-12 did it in 2019.
Right.
Larry Scott had gone out, and the Pac-12 had some forward-thinking ideas, right, with its own network. They didn't execute it well, but they also went and said, "Hey, we're going to sell a stake in our media rights." And so they went out, and I am told they got $1 billion offer for 15%, Shark Tank style.
Right.
I had reached out to Mark Cuban at the time to ask him, and he said, absolutely, as a private equity person, you would totally explore this. This is media. This is college athletics. There's money there. And so, they had that offer. Larry Scott brought that back to his presidents. The biggest opposition that he got was from USC. USC said, no, we don't want to do this. We're not in, same school that wasn't interested in taking, teams from the Big 12. I think USC was in its own mind kind of saying, we can stand on our own. We don't want to complicate this. We might be out of here anyway. But the Pac-12 had no appetite for it. I still wonder what would have happened if they would have said yes, because when you bring a private equity firm into the fold, and if you do it the right way, they're going to walk in the door going, where's our exit, right? They're looking for the exit the minute they're in the room. They're looking for a return on their investment. And they're looking for an exit. Now, those things can be dangerous. They can be scary, especially in college athletics, which, hasn't traditionally operated like a private business enterprise. But if you bring them into the room, you also have them in the room when you're negotiating with media rights companies, when you're negotiating with sponsors. They've got a dog in the fight. So I do think the fit is what's more important than the actual money. And Endeavor, given what they have done, given the influence they have in the media world, that's not a bad firm for Brett Yormark to be talking with. But I would be very careful to just start adding schools before you kind of know where it's all going. Now, I'm with people who don't believe that the SEC and the Big Ten, I don't think they really want to leave everybody else behind. I think they just want to create a system where they are clearly so far in front of everybody else. It feels like a group of five versus Power Five comparison, even when you're in that Big 12 ACC boat. I think it's a very tenuous time for the ecosystem, and I wish somebody was out there advocating for the greater good of college athletics, because I think in the end there's going to be some schools in some regions of the country that are going to look around and go, hey, we don't really feel like we have a chance to win.
Right.
And look at the NFL, Kansas City, Nashville, Charlotte. They wake up every day going, hey, we're a move or two away from competing because we're sharing revenue equally. Big Ten and SEC aren't on board with that.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what it would take. Some have suggested a czar for college football and all these things. The politics in college sports, though, is so deep, and these connections run so firm between these schools. I totally see why that's complicated. Trying to pull something off. I firmly believe that the Big 12. I do believe the ACC is going to have trouble once Florida State and Clemson leave. I do believe that. I do believe that Louisville, maybe right after Florida State or Clemson goes out, I think Louisville, once they know what the cost is to leave the conference, is bound for the Big 12. I think they wanted to be there for a while, actually. And then once that starts, it's just dominoes. 20 is the number I have in my head, but they could go to 24 and bring in Washington State and Oregon State very easily.
It just depends. I mean, Washington State, Oregon State, they feel like Big 12 schools to me.
I agree with you.
And I think they would fit, and they would create, Brett Yormark has talked about that fifth window in the Pacific time zone. There's still a need for inventory in that time zone. I think it's why they were able to sell their rights to the CW and to Fox, and get a decent distribution. They got great distribution. That, money we will see, but that becomes the bigger question, because if Oregon State, Washington State look around and maybe the chaos doesn't happen, or maybe a little bit of it happens, but nobody's willing to make massive changes with the Big 12 or the ACC beyond those schools leaving. Now, Oregon State, Washington State have to reconstitute, right? They have to get to 8 teams. And I think the move they'll make is to try to say, look, we were just going to create the best Pacific time zone, Western United States conference that exists, and try to grab that group of 5, automatic berth to the playoff every year. And so I think that is their fallback plan. I think their fallback is a rebuild to the Pac-12, but I think they're going to talk about rebuilding first and as the primary thing publicly. But I think down deep, they would love to be in the Big 12. I think that would be the place. And I think you see it with scheduling. Oregon State adding, Kansas State and Houston, in gymnastics. They're talking about gymnastics becoming a Big 12 member. Those discussions are happening. The media day, Oregon State, Washington State had a chance to, schedule their own media day, right? They could have put it in the Pacific Northwest. They could have gone to downtown Portland, where they started the conference, 108 years ago. No, where'd they go? They went to Vegas, right between Big 12 and Mountain West Conference Media Day.
Exactly.
I mean, they're just trying to stay close, stay in the room, keep the line of communication open with Brett Yormark and the Big 12, and that's not dumb.
No, not at all. And I agree with you. I think the strategy is forthright and has a lot to gain. So I think as long as they can stay relevant, stay in the news, have people talk about them, even if it goes another year, I do believe that they're going to draw some attention.
Yeah.
By the way,
they have to be good on the field. I mean, and I think it's a real challenge for Oregon State right now, because they're changing head coaches. They lost Jonathan Smith. They that was a 8, 9, 10 win season. Frankly, playing the schedule that they're going to play this year with Mountain West heavy, that Jonathan Smith would have retained more of that roster than a new coach. He wins in 9 or 10 games. Now you've got Trent Bray in a first year. Nobody knows he can coach. He's a first-time head coach. It's a really dangerous position. Meanwhile, Washington State, coming off a very modest season, Jake Dickert did a really nice job retaining. And so I think Washington State, with the competition they're going to play, and even in week 3, playing a Washington team that's in a transition with a new head coach, I think Washington State's pretty interesting.
I always love watching the Cougars. You never know what you're going to get.
Right.
They could lose to Ball State and turn around and beat Michigan.
That's right.
It's kind of the way it goes in Pullman. Um, Another follow-up, man, because you know Arizona better than I do. Brett Yormark was there the other day, gave a speech, and basically he was telling, I think it was our board of trustees or at least administration, that the Big 12 is a football conference. It's not a basketball conference. It's a football conference, and part of that was that he wanted to say, if we want to stay relevant, one, it has to be football first, and two, facilities have to be up to spec. What did you think about that?
Well, I think everybody knows 85 cents, maybe more, of every media rights dollar is attributed right now to football.
Right.
And basketball may be undervalued. I've heard that argument made. People at Gonzaga are saying, "Hey, wait a minute, like there's a brand here," and that's all true. But I think Yormark is preaching a strong message for a school that traditionally has been when it comes to football, right? And
Yes.
they've had some good seasons. Jed Fish had a great season last year. I think they made a sneaky good hire with Brett Brennan. I think he's going to be a top 4 finish in the Big 12. Keep an eye on Arizona.
Have you?
Yeah, I know. I've known Brett a long time. He used to coach at Oregon State, and
Okay.
he is a Bay Area guy. I grew up in the Bay Area. We have a lot of connections, but he's such a good coach. Oregon State had a chance to hire him. I get why they went internally to Trent Bray, but I think there might be a little rubbernecking here as Arizona goes off. I think he's going to have a really good first season at Arizona. But Yormark's preaching a message that conference commissioners need to be preaching. If you're not in the Big Ten and the SEC, maybe you're not aware of this, but you've got to invest in football. And the Pac-12 did that, right? They did that in the last 3, 4, 5 years. They had a great season last year with a lot of good coaches. They had, candidates for the Heisman Trophy. Yep. You had, Washington and Oregon sniffing around the playoff for most of the year, late in the year. You look at the Heisman winners and the Heisman finalists. This is a conference that was developing good talent, but it came because they invested in football. And so Yormark, I think it's a strong message, and I think Arizona needs to hear that. And I think more importantly, the Board of Regents at Arizona need to hear it, because you have a athletic department there that is in financial distress.
Right,
and
big time.
There's going to be, I think most people would say, okay, this is a time to cut back. This is a time not to spend. I think Yormark was saying, hey, that's cool, but you need to spend in football because that's where it matters.
All right, got 2 more questions for you, and then I'll get you out of here. The first one is, by this time next year, how many autonomous conferences will there be? Talking top football. I don't care anything about basketball. Autonomous conferences that can play at the highest level, can pay the $22 million entrance fee for the players, and this is yearly, by the way, can take and support their programs with outside NIL. Right now, that list is getting shorter. How many do you think? How many conferences are there next year?
I think there'll still be 4 next year, but I think the ACC's got to look different. I just don't think you can hold schools that don't want to be there. I mean, I think the Pac-12 learned that. Ultimately, if USC and UCLA don't want to be there, there's not a lot you can do. Now, there was some criticism there. People said, hey, you should have been more forward-thinking, should have offered to share revenue unequally. Right. I still think USC and UCLA would have put their rights out there and said, hey, who wants us? We have the LA TV market. So I think it'll still be 4, but I think there's going to be a shift here. I think you're going to have that 3rd division, that bronze medal conference,
right,
which I think now is the Big 12. I think it might look different. And I think you might, it just depends. Like, does the Big 12 have an appetite, or does the ACC get smart and say, all right, we're going to create, we're going to add schools and create divisions. San Diego State is still out there for somebody who's interested in getting into Southern California. I think that's an interesting piece as well. But the way they divided up the college football playoff money, they pretty much decided who the Power 4 schools were.
Yep.
Now, those schools can move around and the money will go with them. But I still think we'll have 4 conferences. But I don't know. How do you keep somebody under contract in your conference who just says, I don't want to be here? And I think in the end, that becomes how do we negotiate your exit?
Right. Well, we did the math while you did as a team. We broke it out. If they don't get $300 million for each school, I mean, in total, get the penalty and the fee and everything. If they can't get right around $300 million per school, whoever leaves, that conference is DOA. The math doesn't work.
Yeah.
You went back and said, okay, what are they making now? How can they move forward? What do they lose with Clemson and Florida State leaving? It's so much.
Yeah.
It's really a scary proposition for them.
Yeah, and I feel for SMU as well, because SMU, we talk about Stanford and Cal, but those SMU donors and boosters, they bought their way into that conference.
Do
They,
you really feel bad for them?
I do,
Okay,
because
why?
well, I just think that they so desperately wanted to be back into major college football,
Right.
and they bought their way. They were so desperate, they were willing to say, "Hey, we will subsidize."
Right.
They were going to do it with the Pac-12. Like in the 11th hour of that Pac-12 negotiation, I said, "What's SMU's role?"
I
And they
saw
say,
that article and read it.
SMU's creating some cash flow.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And ultimately, we saw they created cash flow in the ACC. So those SMU fans, they had a record-breaking, fundraising campaign after they announced they were going to the ACC. And the last thing they want to hear is, "Hey, guess what? It was a nice party, but it's ending at 8:00." Nobody wants to hear that. So the question then becomes too, it's not even in this year. What consolidation is on the horizon?
Right.
How safe does Purdue feel? How safe does Vanderbilt feel? Mississippi State? And, if you're not that clearly the message from the SEC and the Big Ten is, we're not taking the NFL's model. They're not into Kansas City sharing revenue with New York.
Right.
It's so if I'm within those conferences, I think the conversation in that next media rights deal is going to be, okay, you can stay, but you have to invest a minimum amount in your athletic department. Your budget has to be here. And by the way, you're getting a 40% distribution on the media rights money. And I think that is a scary thing. And it's not good for it's not the greater good either.
Yeah, I personally believe it's going to be 3, maybe not next year, but within the next couple of years. Not schools actually moving, but announcing they're going to move. And to me, it's math.
Yeah.
I think SEC and Big Ten are easy in. And I hate to say this, but we need another name for this. But the best of the rest conference, that's the best of the rest football brands.
Yeah.
Football brands that can draw numbers that aren't 80,000 people. Like SMU's viewership is, I don't know. I just shake my head about that. BYU waited a long time, put in a lot of street cred to get to where they're at. Just writing a check really rankles a lot of people.
Yeah. How about this, though? I was talking with a conference commissioner, not in the Big Ten or SEC, yesterday. And I said Power 4. And the conference commissioner said, let's be real, it's a Power 2. They can call it what you want. It is a Power 2. And I really think the Big 12, the ACC, and the G5 schools need to huddle up while those other two are huddling up and say, how do we keep them within view of that front windshield? Because if you're not careful, you may be able to say, hey, it's a Power 4 or it's a Power 3. But if you're not getting $60 or $70 million a year in media rights money over time, how do you compete?
Yeah, I mean, the money's definitely there. I think it's more about access, but you're saying the exact same thing. All right, last question, and this is the one that I get from BYU fans all over. Both you and John Wilner wrote articles about if BYU had entered the Pac-12.
Yeah.
In the last 15, 20 years. I personally still have in a trunk an article written in 1986 saying, why isn't BYU in the Pac-12?
Should have been.
So how do you? Can you just speak just to BYU people and say, let them know that they actually were appreciated out in the world, even if they didn't make it?
You know how much grief I got? All right, so Oregon played BYU in a Vegas Bowl in, was it 08, 09?
I can't remember.
Right, I don't know, but they kicked Oregon's.
They did.
Can I say it? Can I say it on your
You
podcast?
can say ass.
They
Sure.
kicked Oregon's ass in that game. And I wrote in the lead up to that game that BYU would have been a top half of the Pac-12 conference team.
Right.
I got a lot of grief, in particular from Mike Bellotti, the Oregon coach, who was annoyed at me saying that I thought they belonged. I thought they would have done really well in the conference that year. BYU had a really good team. Pac-12 was top heavy, as it was in a lot of years in that time. I thought BYU could compete, and I think BYU won that game decidedly, to the point where when I went back to the hotel, Oregon players were sitting in the hotel. Like, when you walk in Vegas, you walk down the hotel, you can see forever. They were sitting outside their rooms kind of just sort of dejected after the game. It was a knockout. Game was over at halftime.
Right.
It was an absolute, like, people were leaving the stadium, knockout. And after the game, I wrote, I asked Mike Bellotti, I said, do you think they could have finished in the top 3 after they just kicked his ass? And, he basically told his media guy, get this guy away from me.
Yeah.
Like, get him away from me. So to BYU fans, I know all fan bases feel this way, that, it's them against the world, whatnot. But I really do think that, Pac-12 took Utah because it valued the Utah brand in Salt Lake City. It was a media market. It was 1 million TV households. And I think if it weren't for Utah, I think there would have been a lot more interest in BYU. If the roles were reversed, I think they would have taken one or the other. But Utah's going to kick BYU's ass this year. I can tell you that. I can tell you that.
Well, hey, let's see who's the quarterback.
Yeah.
Because Cam has to get through an entire season.
I know, but they're good.
Utah is good. I'll admit
good.
Utah's good.
Yeah.
And BYU's in a 3 to 5 year rebuild. Let's just be open and honest about it.
Yeah.
If you set expectations, then you're not disappointed.
I think BYU will be better than expected. I saw a lot of people are picking them last. I don't think they'll be last. And I think there's some. I like Arizona. I like Utah. I like the 2 Kansas schools. I think that's your top 4. I think Colorado is going to have better trajectory in the Big 12 overall, but I'm not sold yet that they're a bowl team, because I think there's some revenge in the early part of the year, and there's some Big 12 schools that I think are already probably sick of hearing about Colorado and what they're going to do. So I still am saying, if you're betting on Colorado to win the Big 12, you're throwing your money away. Just burn it, roll it up and burn it.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
All right, John, we've gone past our half-hour allotment. I appreciate you coming on. I'm looking forward to joining you on your show.
Yes,
I would love to do that whenever you want. And if you wouldn't mind sticking around after I close this out, I just want to give you a little piece before you go.
All right.
All right, very good. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Make sure you follow us both on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, the College Football Mafia Network, and all the shows that we have at Wild Ute, Moen, and Rock and Rant. I appreciate everybody for being here today. Let me find my little music icon, and we'll sign out. Everybody have a great weekend. Stay out of trouble, and peace out.